Welcome to the Sewing Report. I'm Jen. This channel is all about sewing crafts and DIY projects, and we continue the Learn to Sew in 2020 series. I know during this self-quarantine we've got a lot of time at home. Check out some of the other videos in the playlist. Just to start from the beginning, all projects are going to be made on the Brother CS7000i, and we are going to be focusing on really cute baby items. So I want to share some of my favorite patterns, and I shot the process of making all of these things. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer video. If you want to skip ahead to each individual project, I will have timestamps in the description box. Let's start off with the baby blanket. No pattern required, just 2 different 1-yard cuts of fabric. Great project to use all those single yards of fabric, like these cute prints from the Lotus Pond collection. First, I placed the fabric right sides together and lined up the edges the best I could. They won't be exactly the same, but that's okay. Fold it in half, then in half again. To even out the edges, I trimmed off the excess on the 2 unfolded sides. Then set the fabric onto quilt batting laid out flat. It should be significantly larger than the yardage. Unfold the fabric and start pinning the 3 layers together. Take this to the sewing machine and stitch around the perimeter with a 1/2-inch seam allowance. At each corner, leave the needle down and pivot 90 degrees. Continue sewing down the next side. Leave about an 8-inch opening for turning. Here's how I trimmed the excess batting. Fold back the seam allowance and place a quilting ruler over the edge like this. Cut off the batting with a rotary cutter. Clip all 4 corners to eliminate bulk. For a neater finish, press back the seam allowance at the opening. Now start turning the blanket right side out. You may have to manhandle it a bit. Push out the seams on each side the best you can, then press. Use an object like a chopstick or turning tool to poke out the corners, but don't push too hard or the stitches could pop. Top stitch around the perimeter. I did 2 rows, one about a 1/4 inch and another a 1/2 inch away from the edge. I'm using a walking foot to make all of these projects because it's my favorite for most sewing tasks. Overlap the stitches a few inches when you get to the starting point to lock the stitches. For an added touch, I included a Sewing Report handmade label on one corner. Final measurements approximately 35 by 40 inches. A good size for a baby blanket, but you can make this in any size. Next up, these great baby bandanas, perfect for meal times or just a fashion accessory. This pattern is easy to follow and make. I traced the piece onto heavy stabilizer to reuse again. I mixed and matched prints and fabric types, including quilting cotton, flannel, and waffle weave terry cloth. Trace and cut front and back pieces. Place them right sides together. Instead of pins, I glue basted the seams with Elmer's washable school glue and a hot dry iron. Leave a gap open of about 4 inches for turning later. Take it to the sewing machine and stitch around the perimeter except for the opening, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Be sure to backstitch at the beginning and end. One tip with the walking foot: if your needle position is at 3.0 and you line up the edge of your fabric at the inside metal guide, that's right at a 1/4 inch. Clip the corners to eliminate bulk. Time to turn the bandana right side out through that opening. Use a point turner or a chopstick to poke out the corners. Press the bandana so it looks crisp and neat. Again, use glue to close up the opening. Back at the sewing machine, top stitch close to the edge, but skip the section that will be touching the baby's neck, so it's softer against the skin. Back stitch at the beginning and end. Last step is adding plastic cam snaps to the ends. This is all from a kit I bought from Amazon. Poke a hole in the bandana with the included awl. Insert the snap pieces and use the press to install them. A while back I did a tutorial on cam snaps if you want to know more about them. These really simple knit hats are quick to make and a great scrap buster. This is a pattern I've used quite a few times and it works well with cotton or cotton blend knits. It's only 4 pieces total and construction is simple. Right sides together, pin the darts at the top of the hat. Pin the hat band pieces at the sides. With a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew parts you just pinned, backstitching at the beginning and end. With small scissors, snip the inner corner of the darts and press the seam allowances open. It will help to use a tailor's ham or a sleeve roll. Press open the band seam allowance as well. Matching up the seams, fold the band piece in half wrong sides together. Pin together the top hat pieces right sides together. Sew all of these with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Right sides out, pin together the band to the top pieces by lining up the seams. The band is smaller than the hat's top when you sew them together. I used a serger for a cleaner finish and stretched out the band as I went along so the two pieces matched up. What an easy and fast project. These are the finished baby hats with the band folded up. I still can't get over how adorable these baby booties are. This was my first time making anything like this project. There were a few steps that tripped me up, and I'll explain in my demonstration what I think could make it easier. I will certainly make these again. I think they turned out just adorably freaking cute. Here are all the cut pattern pieces laid out plus the elastic. They make one pair of booties. This was probably the most difficult project out of all of them, but I learned a few tricks. First, prepare some of the pieces. Place the bottom sole pieces wrong sides together and then sandwich a layer of sew-in interfacing in between. Pin all 3 layers together. Right sides together, pin the tongue pieces. The back piece was the most difficult to instruct because it requires stretching elastic over it while sewing at the same time. Originally, I followed the instructions with a 3.5-inch cut of elastic pinned at the ends and middle of the marked line. This did not work well for me. Instead, I cut a 4.5-inch piece and marked out the 3.5-inch section. I lined up one end with the markings and placed under the sewing machine. The secret is that I started sewing a little before the marking, backstitch, and stitch until the marking. Then stretch the elastic out and match up markings on the other side with one hand. Using the other hand, hold on to the piece behind the presser foot and continue stitching. Once you get to the end marking, make a few stitches forward and back to lock in place. After removing from the sewing machine, cut off the excess elastic. This is how it's supposed to look and stretch. And by the way, the elastic goes on the wrong side of the fabric. With a 1/4 inch or less seam allowance, sew the bottom sole layers together. From here on out, you'll be using a 1/2-inch seam allowance. Sew the tongue pieces together, backstitching at the beginning and end. Trim the seam allowance down with scissors. Turn right side out and press. Pin together the back pieces right sides together, but leave the shorter end of the long sides open for turning. Sew together with back stitching at both ends. Be careful and go slow around those curves. Trim down the seam allowance and turn right side out. Lining up the center notches, secure the back and tongue pieces to the bottom with the side you want facing out on the inside. You can use pins, but I used glue. You'll need to stretch the back and tongue pieces so they overlap a good amount. sew or serge all around the boot sole. Turn the booties right side out. Now to add cam snaps to the tabs. Poke a hole in the booty with the included awl. Insert the snap pieces and use the press to install them. And again, be sure to check out that more in-depth video I did on installing cam snaps. Here are the finished baby booties, without question the most time-consuming but very satisfying to finish. Burp cloths are a fantastic go-to baby gift. New moms love them. I've gotten a lot of great feedback over the years from burp cloths I've given friends, and I've tried a few different patterns, but for this one I wanted to make my own, so available now on sewingreport.com. My pattern for super simple home cloths, and I didn't call the pattern burp cloths because I feel like these could have quite a few different uses. Obviously now there's kind of a paper product shortage, so you could use these as reusable paper towels, just everyday cleaning, placemats. Depending on what type of fabrics you use, these cloths can have all different sorts of functions around the house or with a new baby. Download and print out the pattern. It's meant to be traced and cut on the fold. Place the pieces right sides together. I typically do one side as quilting cotton and the other more absorbent fabric like flannel or terry cloth. Instead of pins, glue baste the seams with Elmer's washable school glue and a hot dry iron. Leave a gap open of about 4 inches on one side for turning later. At the sewing machine, stitch around the perimeter with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You may want to go slowly navigating those corners. Back stitch at the beginning and end. With pinking shears, trim down the corner sections. Press back the seam allowance at the opening. Turn the cloth right side out and poke the corners with your fingers. Push out the seams on each edge the best you can, then press. Use glue to close up the opening. Top stitch around the perimeter about a 1/2 inch away from the edge. Overlap the stitches a few inches when you get to the starting point to lock those stitches. These home cloths or unpaper towels are multi-use, anything from cleaning to baby burp cloths. One idea for presentation is to fold it in half, roll up, and display in a bunch. Oh yeah, and this project is fat quarter friendly. Okay, so now that we've gotten through all of the gifts, I'm going to be wrapping them up, trying to maybe make them look somewhat presentable. Mailing them off. My friend Allison is very pregnant and she's also a YouTuber, and I wanted to make her some things for the baby. She and her husband Lynn have decided to wait to find out whether the baby is a boy or girl until the actual birth. So I had to be kind of careful with the fabric choices. I tried to find a lot of more gender neutral prints that were still fun. Also, a side note, Allison has a horse, so I thought it'd be really fun to use a lot of my horse prints. These are some of my favorite fabrics, cotton and steel, and this is a Melissa Mortensen, I believe it's called Derby Style was the line, and I bought a bunch of it when it was out. So I think Allison will really appreciate the horsey themed fabric. I'm also gonna send them a couple of fabric masks I made, just because she's gonna be a new mom, they're gonna be new parents, so you can always have another fabric mask during a pandemic, right? Down in the comments, let me know what are your favorite baby items to make and gift. Love to hear about them. And if you're looking for something else to watch, I would encourage you to check out Allison's channel. She is a former reporter. She vlogs a lot about more off-grid life, renovating an Airstream, and she also does some commentary on news and media. Very interesting stuff. Highly encourage you. I'll see you guys next time for the Sewing Report. I'm Jen, and also stay tuned for next week when hopefully we bring you some reaction to this gift. I'm curious to see if they like it or not.